Um, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce all three of our speakers first, and then they'll take their turns. Pam Fochman is president of Loreto Books, and they are well known for their children's audiobooks and read-alongs. And their mission is to promote second language literacy and the appreciation of Latino culture. Pam majored in Spanish and has continued to actively study and use the language, and she even got a graduate degree in Latin American trade and economics, and she worked in audio distribution before she founded Loreto 4 years ago. Our second speaker will be Millie Lugo, the librarian on our panel. She's senior librarian for adult services at the Santa Ana Library here in Orange County. In addition to selecting Spanish, Millie works very hard on outreach and workshops and programs to the Spanish-speaking community. She has Words for Work, which teaches employment-related English, a computer literacy class that I understand always has a waiting list, and Usted y su Biblioteca, which is a class for encouraging adult ESL students to use the library as a resource. This spring, Millie was named one of Library Journal's Movers and Shakers, and I think we all know what an honor that is. Narissa Moran, as I mentioned, is Brodart's manager of Spanish collections and acquisitions. She came to us in 2003 when we acquired her company, Books on Wings, a Spanish distributor in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she also ran a retail bookstore as part of that operation. She's been selecting and acquiring Spanish language for U.S. libraries for over 30 years. And she's also very proud of the fact that she has attended FIEL in Guadalajara every year since its inception. She's responsible for selecting, acquiring, promoting our Spanish titles, and she loves working directly with libraries. So we'll start with Pam, and I will try to keep up as the PowerPoint clicker, and we'll hope to finish by about 11:45 so that we can have questions before the lunch comes.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome to all of you. I'm thrilled to be here today. Very excited to be part of this panel, and honored, really, to hear you say well known, because I'm a new publisher. I've been publishing for about 4 years, and built Loreto Books from just a dream, an idea, and have been gradually adding more and more audiobook read-along sets, and really came at it from a student's perspective and learning the Spanish language book world when I started it. So I really focus on Latino culture in the U.S. as well as children's books from Mexico. So my part of the presentation is going to talk a lot about Mexico. I feel that Mexico is a really important, the Mexican culture is an important part of Latino culture in the U.S., as well as the Mexican book world is an important part of the interchange between the U.S. publishing industry and the Mexican publishing industry. So I'm going to talk a bit about why Mexico is so important and how that impacts the content of books in the Mexican publishing industry, and then a little bit about how that filters over the U.S. border. So I'm going to start with some demographics about Hispanics living in the U.S. About 2/3 of the Latinos living in the U.S. self-identify as Mexican origin. So that's a really large percentage. And of those Latinos, 51% identify themselves by their family's country of origin. So this family of origin matters, and I'm sure you've all seen this with people you've met. I have a friend that has been in the U.S. since the age of 2, and his family came from Ireland, and he still identifies as an Irishman. So that, where you come from and where your family comes from is really important. So there's a strong identity with Mexican culture among Latinos in the U.S. And of that group, young Hispanics report that their parents are more likely to express pride for their country of origin than the United States. And the other part of that is that they are highly encouraged to use Spanish and speak Spanish in the home. And all of these facts come from the Pew Hispanic Center, which is a great source for demographic data on Latinos in the U.S. So I'd like to talk next about the economic trends in Mexico's publishing industry and just share a little bit with you. When I first went to the Guadalajara Book Fair, I had no idea what I was getting into. And I went into it very cold. Somebody said, you ought to go to Guadalajara. So I went to Guadalajara and I made the mistake, well, it's not a mistake, it was really interesting. I went on the first day, which is a Saturday. For those of you who have been there, you know that Saturday is the public day. So I arrived on the public day when the show opened, and to my amazement, cars full of families and young children were getting out of the cars and going into the exhibit hall. I had never seen anything like this in the U.S. It was amazing. So that tells you there is a great interest in books and literacy in Mexico, and FEEL is a major event in Guadalajara for Mexicans, but it was astounding, the level of participation among families living in that area. So some of the things that are happening in Mexico that are impacting the publishing industry, Mexico, while it's still considered a developing country and relatively high percentage of poverty, there is a rising percentage of middle class population living at what is considered a middle class income in Mexico. So when that happens, the middle class starts to spend more money on things, investing in their children, like education and school, and the government will follow. And so that can have a major impact on literacy. The other thing that affects publishing in Mexico is that the government is a very large spender on books, larger than most developing countries and most developed countries throughout the world. When I looked at UNESCO statistics, I know I'm kind of going out of order, but when I look at UNESCO statistics, the Mexican government spends a larger percentage on their budget on education and literacy, promoting literacy within this country, which is similar to what Brazil has done. When Lula Silva was the president of Brazil, Brazil invested heavily in developing that country, in building a more educated workforce and developing the country internally through education and building literacy among the middle class. So going back on the government spending on books, Fondo de Cultura Económica is funded by the Mexican government, and they have an extensive backlist of 7,000 titles. So a government-subsidized publisher in Mexico, subsidizing very remote, very small print run titles, but what they're doing is preserving the culture of Mexico, preserving the heritage of Mexican by investing in publishing. The Mexican government school and classroom library programs account for 23% of all private sector books sold in 2010. That's a really huge percentage. That is higher than most other countries. And then the Plan Nacional de Lectura provides books for classrooms and school libraries all throughout the country. There is a list that they publish every year, and that list of books is the list of books that goes into every single school library throughout Mexico. So that's a big deal for publishers in Mexico. Even to be shortlisted on that book on that list is a big deal. Then some of the things that are happening in Mexico. Mexico, it has been hit hard by the recession, in part because the private sector is spending less on books, but there are still book sales. But what's happening is that overall, 2010 book sales were down 139 million copies. That's a total of 12%. Children's book sales are down even at a greater percentage, 42% decline. And juvenile fiction is only down 9%, which is a lot, but in comparison to total children's book sales. So what that tells you is that the older kids, there's more money being spent on literacy for older kids in Mexico. And then adult literature is down 40%. However, religious books is only down 8%. So that's reflective of the values of the culture in Mexico. Religion is still a major part of the Mexican culture. And then I have some general things to talk about that I hear when I talk to publishers and authors, and when I go to Guadalajara, and when I read about what's happening in Mexico. There are socio-political trends that are impacting children's book content. Mexico, as I'm sure you know, has moved towards greater transparency in their government, a higher level of democracy. So typically when this happens in a country, there's more dialogue about national values. So definitely impacting content of children's material coming from Mexico. There's a greater focus on indigenous cultures, Mexican pride. Mexico is striving to not only strengthen democracy, but increase their level of sovereignty. So inevitably, things like that are going to percolate into education policy and children's book content. So these are some of the things that I consider and look at when I'm reviewing books. How are national policy and national mood affecting content of children's literature? So the short list of the titles for the Plan Nacional de Lectura, that list was released recently, and when I review that list, I see a number of titles on that list that are focusing on indigenous cultures, the ancient cultures of Mexico, are really rich, very fascinating culture that are often overlooked. So there's a greater emphasis on topics like that, and there are a number of books on the list that are reflecting that topic. So really the conclusion with that is that place does matter. You know, when we were all talking about globalization 15 or 20 years ago, I think the belief then was that place wasn't going to matter anymore. We were all going to become really homogenous. The world was flat. You know, where you come from was going to become less and less important. But actually what's happened is that the reverse has happened. Place does matter. More people want to identify with some place, with some culture. So, you know, if you consider that, that's why Latinos in the U.S. still want to read about Mexican culture. Why they're still interested in reading about Aztec culture, even though they're far removed from that locationally and historically. People are still interested in Aztec, Mayan, all the rich historic cultural aspects of Mexico. And then just to wrap up, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I look for, what my selection criteria is when I'm selecting books. And when I'm selecting a book, I'm selecting a book to invest in it. I'm either investing in it as an audiobook production, or I'm investing in it as a book for distribution to sell in the US. Either way, I'm still investing because I'm investing time and money, shelf space, brain damage, getting them here. So I need to really like them. So I have been accused of being picky about books because there are a lot of books I don't want to carry. I have to really have a strong belief that it's A, something I can get really excited about, and B, I can market it in the US. So when I look at a book for audio, I typically look for things that make it a good read-along, a good read-aloud. I will often read it. I do literacy volunteer work in the Denver area, so I might take it to my school group and read it to them. How does it sound when I'm reading it? Do kids like it? Do they engage with it? Does it flow? Is it awkward? Things like that. And then are the illustrations are they something that kids are going to want to pore over and really spend time looking at those pictures and making that connection between the words and the pictures? So I always look for things that are promoting all the wonderful aspects of Latino culture, and I also look for things that have universal cultural things that cross cultural boundaries. I did publish an audiobook on tamales. but I also like to find books that have universal themes like universal family values and things like that that cross cultural boundaries. I like to find books that can promote second language literacy, that will teach children, they will entertain them, and they will slyly teach them at the same time. So books that will keep them interested, but at the same time they're building literacy skills and biliteracy skills and confidence. I like to find books that have a very distinctive graphic style, and that's one of the things that I find is very characteristic of the children's books from Mexico. I think a lot of the arts culture of Mexico filters through the illustrations. The illustrative style that I see is very distinctive. It's unlike anything that I can find in the US. So I might sometimes forgive a book for maybe not perfect writing. Like I have a series on the possum, a tlacuache, that is not super deep, but it's just got fabulous illustrations that are fascinating, and another thing that kids can pore over and spend time with. So graphic style is really important. Visual arts does matter. The other challenge always is finding books, particularly books from Mexico, that have the right balance of text on the page. I think that editors in Mexico should probably go back to editing school and find ways to cut text, because they have a tendency to run long. And I know from my experience in reading aloud that you can lose kids when text goes on and on and on and on. So I look for the right balance, and it's challenging. You know, sometimes there's too much, but you have to make compromises. So that's an issue. And then the final point is the audio. Ideally, you find when you create an audiobook, you want an audiobook that's going to want kids to listen over and over and again, like the cassette tapes. My kids are older now, so I can say cassettes. The cassette tapes that my kids listen to over and over and over again. My goal is to create audiobooks like that kids will want to listen to repeatedly. And by doing that, they're building their reading skills, their second language skills, and we're passing on a wonderful experience for them. So it fills that time in the car when you're driving to soccer practices and things that take up family time. So that is it for my portion. I'm going to turn it over to Millie.
Thank you, Pam. Well, my report is from the trenches. As an adult librarian, we're going to talk about the trends that we meet and the circumstances of our Hispanic population. All of us as librarians are faced with two very big challenges, and that is reduced budgets and linguistically diverse communities. And based on that, we also have to deal with, as you will see, increased populations. We have low educational attainments, very little technological skills. When I was doing my research to do this presentation, I was thinking, about library school, how they teach you, how do you develop collections. Well, I'm going to tell you that that model that you were taught does not work with the Spanish collections. Spanish collections, I call them PDAs, which are patron-driven acquisitions. That's exactly what I have found out. And I'm going to repeat this, and this is going to be really fast because I've been covered very well. More than 50 million Hispanics, all of you know that. The demographics, you already know, 4 times growing faster, and it's going to continue to grow. I was at a meeting this morning, and populations from Kansas, a friend here was telling, yes, you're getting a lot of people from Guatemala, I believe, and Central America. So it's growing fast. We are also just increased 15.2 million. I mean, these are just stats. And the next one is Mexican are the largest group, as Pam said. There's no doubt about it. And if you still doubt it, there it is. That's the latest census figures. There's no, and the difference is extraordinary between Mexico and then the other areas. If we go as to the places where they're concentrated, this will be the next slide. How many people are here from California? Texas? Florida? So you guys are the biggest three holders of Hispanics. But following, we have Illinois, and of course, we have Arizona as well. So those are challenges that librarians are going to have to face in those areas. We can go continue to the next one. So aside from the demographics, we have to face in our community social and educational attainment. My experience has been that the average immigrant that comes to the United States has at least a 6th grade education, if not less. And compared with other immigrant groups, we have already established that Mexicans are the majority. We find that they're younger, and that makes sense. They're immigrants. They have to be fit. They have to cross the border. They're looking for work. Another aspect, less educated. We already did that. The next one, less likely to speak English well. Again, I'm just reaffirming what you found out, and it's true. Continue. The last reason is technologically challenged. And people ask me, do you have e-books in your library? We have a public library. I'm teaching people how to use the mouse. So the e-book situation right now, as for what I've seen, is slow. I'm not saying it's not coming, but it's very slow, especially in low income communities. Santillana, USA, one of the biggest promoters and sellers of ebooks, reported a record sales of 78% within a couple of months. But then I looked at the statistics as to what kind of books, ebooks were being purchased. Literature, and I thought that was interesting. I mean, literature was one of them, romance and biography. So what does this tell you? These are subjects that are for people with disposable income at the time, which is very rare in immigrant communities. They have very little disposable income, they have very little time. So ebooks are selling, and you hear and you see and you read that they are being right up there. But if we take that to the public library, the public library level, we're not there yet. We will be, but at this time, we're not, because of the economic and the educational level of our community. So, what should we do? I'm going to show you the Santa Ana Public Library model. Now, I've already given you an idea of how PDA works. When you look at demographics, when you look at your community, you look at your statistics. And I'm going to show you how we do it here. Santa Ana Public Library, our community, 325,000 people, 78% Hispanic. Unfortunately, my budget is not 78%. I wish. Mexican born, 51% have less than a high school education. A lot of marriages, married. These are 15 years old and older. The majority are married. Language disenfranchised, and digital divide. Okay, that is the actual community that I serve. Those are the facts. Now, that's what I have to take into consideration when I'm doing a collection development. Aside from that, and I'm a sucker for statistics, and I like research, so I'm a librarian, what can I say? I always like to look at my circulation stats, because I want to have an idea of what is it that is moving. I have a business background, so this is a little bit of my business. What is selling? What do the people need? And not surprisingly, of course, the 100s, 600s. That makes sense. Most of the people do not have medical plans. A lot of the books in the 600s are the medicine, how to take care of this, how to deal with high cholesterol. And fiction is not bad. It's not bad at all. And it's pretty consistent. This was an analysis between one year and then the other ones. These are just checkouts. It's very consistent. They maintain their level. So aside from annual checkouts, I said, well, what else do they check out? Do they favor magazines? Do they favor audiobooks? So we go to the next slide, and again, it makes sense. Audiobooks, because of the lower educational level, is easier for them to listen to it, and magazines is easier to read, a lot of pictures. But that doesn't mean that the other areas are less important. Remember, when you're buying on a limited budget, and this is my guideline, you have to be so selective. These are just pointers. They are not, I don't take them as this is, I have to now buy all audiobooks. No, and I don't want you to get that impression, because that's not the way that you do a collection development. These are just indicators. So if you have your budget and this amount, then you know how to distribute it a little bit wiser. And not all the time you'll find good audiobooks, and not all the time you're going to find good magazines. So that's the average turnover rate. So based on that, I'm going to check with you and see if you were paying attention. This is the teacher in me. So let's review. Based on the demographics, I did a study as to the books that were checked out for the past 4 years at the library. So this is 4-year data. So demographic, social educational conditions, technology expertise, popular subjects and materials. So in the 0-0s, what do you think would be one of the ones that would be mostly what subject? Computers, very good. You're paying attention, exactly. 2,346 checkouts in computers, followed by enigmas and mysteries. Okay, in the 100s?
133.
Which is?
The occult, astrology, witchcraft, etc.
Well, it's close, but it was the dream book. Significado de los sueños. Yeah. Those are they're out of the shelf all the time. I always have to buy Significado de los sueños, but witchcraft is right up there too. So let's go on the 200s, of course.
Religion being mostly.
Religion being what? The Bible. My Bibles. And you know what is my biggest lost item? Because they just disappear. There's something about the Bible that people say is the Word of God, so I can take it. You'll understand. And I know that I have had to pull the list and said, I'm in a panic. I need 7 Bibles because I don't have any. And Deepak Chopra is the other popular guy in the 200s. 300s. And remember, we have a young population. They're getting married.
This one surprised me.
Me too. Me too. This one is a title. And that one is, because it's a title, it's going to be harder. Men Are From Mars. Oh. Believe it or not, 2,213 times. They are getting into relationship, followed by sex books. Kama Sutras. And, a popular audiobook? Okay. Yeah. People want to know, all these. But this one, a lot of interpersonal relationship books, how to deal with your husband, how to deal with your wife, that type of thing. Going to the 400s, that's a no-brainer. English, English Spanish dictionary. They all go. Everything related to ESL moves. And then on the sciences and on the 500, this was very interesting when I found out. Go ahead. Books on basic math, but it shouldn't be, because again, their education level is a little low. You need basic math to work, to daily life. You need basic math. So these books really, really move. Going to the 600s. Medical. Remedios naturales. Natural remedies. A lot of natural remedies. A lot of, again, people do not have health insurance. And that's followed by books on pregnancy. We said the St. Anna's a baby factory. Is that right, Susan? There's babies all the time. That one. And remember that when we get to the 900s. Anyway, I give you a clue. Going to the 700s, and this was interesting, but It's interesting, but it's not, because it's a basic fact of Latinos that we like music. And what biggest movers are guitarras. People want to know how to play the guitarra. Followed by how to draw, which was really interesting, followed by crafts. But that's, people need entertainment, and I guess guitar, and it's part of the culture. You have the mariachi, you know, you have people get together in their homes, and then somebody has a guitar, and they, you know, they do that. 800s, we're Latinos, we're romantic, poemas, poetry. Then, followed by chistes. I mean, how can you do it? Life is fun. So you go from romance to chistes, and those are the big two movers. And history and geography is just going to reaffirm what Pam said. Books on nombres de bebé, remember pregnancy, but close following that, books on Mayas and Aztecs. Culture, and going back to the roots. But nombres de bebés, I always need to have, always, you know, you need to have at least 5 or 6 of those. I don't have a slide for this, but I just real briefly on the fiction. Carlos Cuauhtemoc Sanchez.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Followed by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Paulo Coelho, Isabel Allende, and interestingly enough, Nicholas Sparks. Books by Nicholas Sparks are very much in demand. So that takes us to the next slide. What other sources can you use? If you serve the Hispanic community, I encourage you, and this is, you have to connect. You have to connect. You have to go to, once in a while, look at their news. Once in a while, a paper or a magazine. Telenovelas. Perfect way to know what's in. And of course, your community. And there are other resources, a little bit more academic. I love to always check the Pew Hispanic Center, and I said they have free newsletters that they send you. It gives you a feel of what's going on in the Latin community, not only Mexico, but the whole South America. I included in your packets a list of resources, and these are very up to date, because I checked them this month. And all of them are in English except one, which is Spanish. But an interesting one that I really like is called the Accidental Bibliotecario. It's a blog, and it's a very good blog because it deals with Spanish language collection development. Very formal. Then you have the other ones. Again, I have the links here for the other resources. I use these a lot. A lot of them, again, you can subscribe freely. I know the Pew Hispanic, and I said every week I get a little blurb. Pew Hispanic is excellent with their studies. It gives you a good view of what's going on. So, to end, remember adult Spanish collections are PDA, patron-driven acquisitions. Know your community and meet their needs. Bottom line. Thank you so much for your attention.
Just go? Yep. Okay. So first I want to thank both of you for those really informative presentations. I'm always amazed at how much more there is to learn in this field, even though I've been doing this for like 30 years. So it's very interesting. And I want to thank Emily Ann in the back and Lauren Lee right here for they put in a lot of hours, all their hard work for bringing this together, making this conversation possible. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of those busy ALA schedules to come over here and share with us today. And then I don't want to repeat what Pam and Millie have already said, so I'm going to approach the Spanish language collection development from a little bit more of a national perspective. And then I'm going to discuss some misconceptions that I've heard crop up over the last few years, and I'll touch a little bit on adult and children's title selections. And I would like you all to keep in mind that I'm just going to barely touch on these points so that we have time afterwards for questions and answers, so you can bring up some of the issues that you might be facing. Now, Millie showed a map. Let's see. Are we on slide 3? Millie showed a map highlighting the areas where the Latinos live. And if you think back to that map for a minute, you'll remember that there are concentrations of Latinos in the United States, where 30 years ago, we would not have anticipated the need for Spanish language literature. So there's the new communities in places like Kansas, I think you said, Wyoming,
South Dakota.
South Dakota, there we go.
Iowa.
Iowa. Yep, I had that one on my list too. Iowa, Utah. So there's these newer communities that are existing, as well as the long-standing communities like Mexican communities in the Southwest and communities like of Cubans and Puerto Ricans in places like Tampa. Are you from Tampa? You're in Florida. Tampa.
Bay.
Right, Tampa Bay. So you probably have those communities of Puerto Ricans, Cubans, maybe also Colombians, Venezuelans,
Right.
Ecuadorians,
A lot of
right?
people from South America.
In other countries, yeah, Argentines, exactly. So, so as the other two speakers have already said, you have to be aware of these demographics. And Millie gave a really good outline of the demographics in her area. And you need to be aware of that so you can have on your shelves the authors that the patrons are going to want. And I've given two examples here. Are we, let's see. Okay, yes, actually somebody already mentioned Carlos Cuauhtemoc Sanchez. He's a best-selling author in Mexico, so Mexican patrons or patrons of Mexican descent will be very, interested in reading Carlos Cuauhtemoc Sanchez. And then maybe in areas where there are more Cubans, Leonardo Padura might circulate more. So, and that might be true in New York too. Radames might know, so you might be familiar with, in your area, there will be more like Cubans, Puerto Ricans too, in New York, in the New York, greater New York area.
In New York, there's a lot of, there's actually a growing Mexican community. in New
And
York.
growing Mexican
They say it's
community.
going to be the largest Spanish-speaking community. I think Puerto Ricans have started to move out to North Carolina,
Right,
to
right.
Florida, and Texas, and back to Puerto Rico. So it's interesting.
Yeah, interesting transitions there. So one of the things that I do to help, staying with this slide for just a second, one of the things I do to help in my collection development work is that I will mark online, we have an online database, and I will mark there the country of origin of each author. I do this for adult and for children's books. But I also put a little tag there for universal so that I can remind myself or help whatever librarian is looking to see if that's an author that would just appeal to Mexicans or more to Americans and other nationalities, or whether it's an author that's like universally read. And just by the way, I put in the packets that you have, I put a list of authors that are almost all of universal appeal. I think there are 3 or 4 there where it says Mexico in more bold typeface. And those are ones that maybe are read more by Mexicans. But that handout is, if you're an experienced selector, it's a good checklist. And if you're new to selecting, then, then if you're new to selecting, it could be a good starting point. So, moving on to the next slide here. So I want to say that you need to be aware of, or I try to be aware of the demographics, but not too constrained by them, because the country of origin is not the only determining factor. And let me tell you why I did this slide, because I've worked with librarians who will say, I want Mexican authors in my library because I have Mexican patrons. And a couple of times I've had requests for, I want only books from Mexican publishers. But there's a couple of fallacies embedded in those requests. And that is, first, that Mexicans only read Mexican authors, which is of course not true, and that only books from Mexican publishers are going to circulate. I'm going to deviate just a minute here from the slides because I want to point out that a lot of Mexican authors are also published in Spain, and we actually have the privilege of having Francisco Vives with us today, who is the editor of American Read. He runs the American Read Spanish program. If you go online, you can see that. I'm going a little out of order here, but I just want to make sure I didn't forget to introduce him, because you will see a lot of the Mexican authors are published in Spain. just like in Mexico, you will also see people like Arturo Pérez Reverte published, you know, because he's fantastically popular, regardless of whether you're in Argentina or Mexico or what country you're in. So I had a note to introduce you later, but I better make sure I hit that, because if anybody wants to have questions and answer afterwards and talk to Francisco, he's a really good resource to have. So there are no really big publishers that even exist in any one country anymore, like in Mexico. If you were just to use Mexican publishers for your collection, you would be restricted to like Ediciones Era, you could probably help me out with some of these, Siglo XXI, Tomo, Simpli, Mexicanos Unidos, Ediciones El Naranjo, Tecolote, very good publishers. But a lot of the bigger publishers, like, for example, those of us who've been, probably remember, if you've been doing this for a while, a publisher like Joaquin Mortis that gave a chance to a lot of newer Mexican publishers, up-and-coming Mexican publishers, is now owned by Planeta. Grijalbo, the same thing, and they're owned by Random House Mondadori. So, so I kind of bristle when I hear that, well, I only want Mexican publishers, because it's almost hard to parse apart now what is a Mexican publisher as opposed to what is part of a multinational and that. So, so now I want to go back to the question of the authors. To illustrate the point I was making, the next couple of slides show examples of current Mexican authors who are popular in Mexico. And then we have a slide that, in just a second, about non-Mexican authors that are popular in Mexico. So, and I should add that some of these Mexican authors are also universally read by Spanish speakers. Authors like Carlos Fuentes, and just mentioning his name gives me pause. I think many of you may know he recently passed away, very recently. So, but Carlos Fuentes is read not only in classrooms, in universities in the United States, he's also read pretty much universally. You're shaking your head, so you agree with that, Elizabeth. Yeah. So, and others like Guillermo del Toro, who produces movies and has been on TV here in the United States, so he's pretty well universally read. So, so if you're doing a collection, you want to include some of those universally read authors. And I think the next slide will point out some non-Mexican authors that that are also, I want to say that when a new librarian is excited about serving the Mexican patrons, they may forget that there are also these really universal authors that are read by Mexicans. I mean, in what country is Carlos Ruiz Zafón not read? You know, El Palacio de la Medianoche, I think you know which one I'm talking about. You know, Suzanne Collins, The Hunger Games. You go to any bestseller page, and I was going to mention this again later too, but I'll mention it now, that if you go to the America Reads Spanish website, there's a link there, and you can, and Francisco can tell you more about this later in the question and answer period, but you go there and you can link to bookstores from different countries and see their bestseller lists, or you can go online and look up La Gandhi in Mexico, for example, and you'll see the Hunger Games, you know, in Spanish, of course, in translation.
I have, will your presentations be available maybe on the Brodart website, the PowerPoints and whatever from here?
Yes.
Sure.
Good.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to put all of this up. Emily Ann's in charge of that. She'll make sure it happens.
Yes, it'll be there.
Okay.
No need to write it all down
No.
or commit it to memory.
Yes, and Millie is just reminding me that on her sheet, that ARS website is there, yes. So you can find that. Thank you, Millie, that's really good. And also other authors like James Patterson, Danielle Steele, John Grisham. You'll find them on those same bestseller lists, of course, in translation. So, yeah, check that list in your packets, but also you can check those links to those sites, and you'll find bestsellers that you might not, you know, I don't know how many of you are new to the game. You may be way ahead of me on this, but, you know, you can find that a lot of what is read by Mexicans or people of Mexican descent is not just Mexican authors. So I wanted to dispel
Nicholas
that myth.
Clark.
And Nicholas Sparks, right, you already said that, right. So the next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to emphasize here that I'm just highlighting on a couple of points of collection development very generally, so we can ask, we can have time in the question and answer period if you want to talk about this some more. And these are possible guidelines only, each place is going to be different, but for the adult titles there, when I look at a budget and decide what percent of fiction and nonfiction, you would probably take the same kind of approach you would for English. But then you're going to look in both fiction and nonfiction, I guess, but primarily in the fiction, you're going to look at what percentage you want of original language versus literature in translation. So that's what kind of differs. I think, Millie, you might agree with that kind of differs from the English language collection development is looking at original language versus translation. And in the original language, like I said, you want to know the author's nationality, but you don't want to be circumscribed by that because you'll miss some popular titles. So titles, for example, by radio and TV show hosts are popular across the board. They circulate in libraries in all regions of the country. So if you say to me, I'm doing some consulting with a library to get a list together for an opening day collection or something like that, and you say to me, I just want authors that reflect the nationality, that are the same nationality of the people in my community, okay? And you say, I don't want authors from Puerto Rico or Argentina or Cuba, then you wouldn't get books that are popular, or some people would say, like, I don't want Mexican authors so much, not saying that you people in Florida, but other people, have said things like that to me, and then you would miss books by people like Jorge Ramos, or you'd miss the book Dieta del Gordo, or you'd miss, yeah, exactly, or La Doctora Isabel, Cristina, so, these books cross all nationalities. I was going to say a little bit about the strong areas in nonfiction. I guess the only one I put up there that you didn't put up was the secuestros. But I have a whole long list here, and it's the exact same list that especially the 600s, but also like New Age, metaphysics, popular psychology, the craft books, cookbooks, parenting, gardening, finances, how-to, home repair, car repair. I mean, there's a lot of those 600s and some of the others that you mentioned too. Let's see. Let me just I'm going to take a moment on children's titles. I hope I don't run overtime here, but just a brief moment. Getting close? Okay, so we might do this very quickly. Because when I review children's titles, I will use the author's country of origin as a guide. And for instance, when I'm doing reviewing books like from Spain, for example, and Francisco, I'm sure, is well aware of this. If you have books like from the publisher Oco or Corimbo, or this, I will go for the books that have the universal language in them. So one of the things I could encourage you to do is, whether you're experienced and maybe short on time, or whether you're new at this, is rely on your distributor. Rely on people like me, because I'm supposed to sit for 8 hours a day and look at these titles, right? So you want your distributor to screen out, to make lists that are either universal Spanish or a neutral Spanish, or that reflects the country of origin that your patrons are from. So let's see. I need to keep looking back up here. This is just really quick, you need to be aware of cursive text. I think Pam already said that about text heavy. So there's some different criteria that are used in different countries. But I always look for like multicultural images and age appropriateness, because what might be age appropriate in Spain might not be considered age appropriate here. So, and then there's the question of bilingual books. I don't know if I put that on the list, but we can talk about that later if some people have questions on bilingual. So I thought I'd throw in a couple of slides, but maybe we'll run through these pretty quickly because they kind of duplicate what Millie's already said. It's just showing that actually what Millie's experience is probably pretty universal. In this slide, you can see, well, this is just a very general, how much, when we're doing a collection, how much is usually selected for adult and selected for children. On the next slide, you'll see everything on the right side of the chart where it says fiction and easy, that's all fiction, adult fiction and children's fiction, which is closer in this chart to like 50-50 of fiction and nonfiction. And on the left-hand side there, that's all adult and juvie titles. And you can see the 600s are really prominent there, and where it says other, that includes, Millie, that what you referred to as the computer books and everything is in the other there, but yeah. So, let's see. So I guess I'm going to say one more thing about the authors and publishers to familiarize yourself with them. You can go to the America Reads Spanish. I think I put LJ on here, but I don't think you can get LJ reviews anymore. ARS has a link to reviews and link to bestsellers from Amazon and different and other sites. Let's see, Millie, you put a reference guide in your packet, so you've got all the references there. The other thing I can say is that you could go to book fairs. That's been really popular for a collection development aid, you know, to actually see book in hand. So people will go to Guadalajara or they'll go to Liber. Those are the two most popular ones. And one of the interesting things is if you can't get the time to go, or your system is saying, you know, we don't want people to travel because their budgets are so tight. One of the interesting things is that this year, for the first time at Liber in Spain, they're going to start Skyping with the librarians. So you could be in your library and you could be talking to your distributor and the publisher sitting right next to them in Spain, while the distributor is going around to the different publishers and just show you the books right there and talk to you about them without you having to get on the airplane. So, so that's going to be fun. Yeah. So, so I'm a firm believer in attending the book fairs, but I know that with the economic downturn, that's becoming more and more difficult. Let's see. So, if you do travel, though, visit the bookstores while you're there. That's another good source for collection development needs. And in lieu of travel, you can check the bestseller lists online. So for the Mexican, you know, bookstores like La Gandhi or the Sótano, go to La Casa del Libro site, which I think you have a link to. Francisco, I've already said that like 3 times. Okay. So on this last slide here, I just want to say a little bit, not to toot my own horn really, but just, you know, to say the advantages of working with a distributor is that you get the selection support, because I am sitting there filtering these books all of the time, doing lists all the time, to help people out who are, you know, trying to get these collections going, whether it's an opening day collection or ongoing support. So we look at the quality, we look at the language. And I mentioned before, when I was talking about the adult selection, you know, how we put a tag on for the country of origin, but I do that for the children's books too, and I think it's maybe more important there if you're trying to buy books for very young children, you kind of want that to reflect their culture, and Pam, you touched on that too, of course.
Especially language sometimes varies.
Exactly, yes. And we can talk more about that again in the question and answer period if you want. So one of the advantages of working with like a mid-sized distributor or something is you can really help them. You know, you can really get what you need there. Are there any more? Well, turnaround time, shelf-ready.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's one thing that did surprise my staff was, we've done our initial Spanish language orders with you guys, and I think it was like 80% were back ordered, and they said, what? You know, why do they say they have them available if 80% are back ordered? Well, you still have to order them from your distributor as well, blah, blah, blah.
Well, can I just respond to that for a second? This has been a very tricky question for many years now, decades now. Those books are non-returnable, unlike English language books.
Yeah.
So say Brodart were to order a book in English and it were not to move off the shelf, it would be returned after 6 or 8 months. Okay? So we do try to stock all the books that we can, but I try to keep it minimal because we can't return them. And just from a business standpoint, you know, it would be hard to stock all the books.
But also, we have the experience in which publishers and distributors are reliable, so Narissa isn't putting them on our list unless she is confident that we will be able to get them. So that's part of her vetting process.
Right.